There is a recurring problem in the history of ancient philosophy. When a student asks a direct question about the nature of reality, the greatest teachers rarely give a straightforward, logical answer. Instead, they reply with surreal, elaborate stories. We see this in the opening of the Mokṣopāya, a massive 10th century Kashmiri text. Prince Rāma is paralyzed by a profound existential crisis, detached from his royal life. To guide him, the royal court calls upon the sage Vasiṣṭha. Vasiṣṭha understands the limitation of the human intellect. You can logically explain to a person that the physical world is an illusion, but if you throw a rock at their head, they still physically flinch. The body and the deep-seated ego do not care about logical arguments. Because the intellect itself is bound by the illusion of reality, you cannot think your way out of it. Achieving a true experiential realization requires a method that bypasses the logical mind. Vasiṣṭha's approach sits in sharp contrast to other major Indian traditions. He avoids the rigorous dialectics found in the Upanishads and the duty-bound discourse of texts like the Bhagavad Gita. Instead, the text creates a unique literary genre known as Shastra Kavya, a philosophical epic where dense doctrine and surreal poetry fuse together. This text analysis outlines the sheer volume of narrative experiments used. The author notes there are no less than 55 such illustrative stories in the work, designed to impress complex ideas. These narratives are highly calculated thought experiments deployed in the service of philosophy. Vasiṣṭha has built a narrative laboratory. Every story is a specific mechanism designed to systematically dismantle Rāma's perceived reality. This table of contents from a translation of the text shows the vast scope of these thought experiments. Under Part 3, on creation, we find specific listings for the story of Leela and the story of Karkati. The first major test of reality begins with Queen Leela. Driven by a desperate desire to defeat death, she performs austerities to ensure her husband's spirit will remain with her after he dies. She is visited by goddess Saraswati, representing her own higher knowing. As this academic analysis describes, the goddess takes the queen on a lengthy journey through past and future lifetimes. These endless lifetimes occur simultaneously. The journey only lasts moments, conjured entirely in the imagination within her deceased husband's room. This forces the mind to conceptualize the Chidakasha, the infinite space of consciousness. It shatters the assumption that time and physical space are objective, measurable boundaries. Once time and space are deconstructed, Vasiṣṭha introduces the next variable, absolute illusionism. If everything is ultimately a dream, you have to find a way to prove it. He tests this through the story of the Brahmin Gadi. Gadi loses consciousness and lives a grueling lifetime as a tribal king, experiencing years of struggle before eventually waking up. The realization happens after Gadi wakes. He physically travels to investigate his dream and discovers that the tribal kingdom he ruled actually exists out in the waking world. This illustrates the concept of samkalpa, or mental projection. By showing that the waking world and the dreaming world share the exact same origin and structural weight, the boundary between them is erased. Objective reality is shown to be arbitrary. It is no more solid and has no more ultimate cause than a passing random thought. Intellectual understanding alone leaves the ego intact. Beyond the cosmos, Vasiṣṭha focuses on the physical body to answer how a mind inhabiting flesh actually achieves liberation. Vasiṣṭha explores this through the story of Karkati, a colossal, grotesque demoness who undergoes a radical physical transmutation. Through intense practice, Karkati condenses her massive form into a microscopic cholera needle. She eventually transforms into an enlightened teacher, wandering the earth and testing kings with non-dual riddles. We see a similar physical trial with Queen Chudala. After attaining enlightenment, she uses magical disguises to break her husband Sikidvaja out of his rigid, ego-driven asceticism. As this translated passage shows, she explains that she remains in whatever condition she is placed by nature, destroying the dual thoughts of pleasure and non-pleasure. These physical trials exist to prove a point about vasanas, our deeply ingrained mental habits and bodily conditioning. They cannot be ignored or simply wished away. True enlightenment requires the active, grueling transmutation of the physical experience, not just its intellectual dismissal. How does navigating these surreal paradoxes actually change the reader's brain? The text defines these stories as drishtantas, direct pedagogical proofs. They function by deliberately exhausting the mind's rigid, logical habits, forcing the brain to abandon its need to categorize reality. This leads to the text's radical theological claim. Simply reciting or deeply reading the Mokṣopāya is an action sufficient to trigger liberation. Vasiṣṭha uses a metaphor to explain this psychological mechanism. If you mistake a painting of a snake for a live animal, you feel genuine terror. But the moment you recognize it as harmless brushstrokes on a canvas, the threat is neutralized. The stories train the mind to see the world purely as an appearance. Once that perspective shifts, worldly fear, attachment, and suffering evaporate. Back in the royal court, Prince Rāma's deep existential crisis has been answered. His paralyzing illusions regarding objective reality, linear time, and his own ego have been deconstructed by Vasiṣṭha's laboratory. With the ground cleared, Rāma's path transitions from theory to practice. The philosophical experiments have done their job. They have taken Rāma's hearsay knowledge and transformed it into direct experiential readiness. With the great narratives complete, we turn to the practical path. Next time on The Explainer, Episode 22, The 7 Stages of Wisdom.